Hello hockey fans, and welcome back to another video. Over the last 4 decades, the National Hockey League has featured European-born players in some capacity, with the overall number rising in each passing season. According to EuroHockeyClubs.com, it is estimated that there had been 50 European players that had ever played in the NHL as of January 1st, 1980. Skip ahead 40 years, and according to QuantHockey.com, the number of European players that have played in the NHL just this year alone is 303. Though most Europeans had no trouble whatsoever making the move across the pond, the ever-changing social and political climate of the last few decades meant that Russian NHL players were almost unheard of, with just 2 Russians having taken to the ice in the league before 1989. However, thanks to one player's pursuit of a better life overseas and his willingness to defy the orders of his homeland, that was about to change. This is the story of Alexander Mogilny, the first Soviet player to defect to the NHL. In order to tell this incredible tale, allow me to take you back to 1986, when 17-year-old Russian forward Alexander Mogilny joined the Soviet Union's premier hockey club, CSKA Moscow. The teenager would spend the next couple of years with the Red Army team and make a strong first impression in his country's capital, playing alongside fellow youngster Sergei Fedorov, as he scored 27 goals and 36 points in 67 regular season games over 2 seasons. Mogilny would also find success on the international stage too, as he won both a silver medal at the 1988 World Junior Championships in Moscow and a gold medal at the 1988 Olympic Games in Calgary with the Soviet national team. Despite his international success and his increasing importance on CSKA's roster, Mogilny yearned to leave Russia behind and play in the National Hockey League, considered by those outside of Russia to be the best league in the world. However, the Soviet Union wasn't too fond of letting their people, especially star hockey players like Mogilny, leave their country for pastures new. Mogilny's case was worsened due to the Soviet Union being locked in a bitter Cold War with the United States, meaning the USSR weren't about to let one of their top up-and-coming superstars take his talents overseas, especially to their rivals in the NHL. This left Mogilny with 2 options: either continue to play in Russia and help the Soviet Union remain a dominant force in the hockey world, or leave the USSR unofficially by defecting to America. Considering no other Soviet player had likely even considered defecting to the NHL, let alone actually done it, the latter option was considered extremely risky, especially when such a move would render you an enemy of the country you call home. Mogilny's dream of playing in the NHL took a step closer to becoming a reality on June 11, 1988, when the Buffalo Sabres selected Mogilny with the 89th overall pick in the 1988 entry draft, the highest a Soviet player had been selected in the draft at the time. As you might expect, this selection was met with sighs and eye rolls from GMs around the league, especially considering Buffalo's track record of making silly draft picks, like their selection of fictional player Taro Sugimoto in 1974, which I've already made a video on, so you should go and watch that after you finish watching this. After being informed of his selection by the Sabres, Mogilny's desire to play in the NHL only continued to grow, as he knew a team had taken a chance on him despite the circumstances and had a place for him on their roster. However, the Russian forward would have to bide his time and wait for the right opportunity to make a move. Mogilny spent the following 88-89 season with CSKA Moscow, playing on a line with Sergei Fedorov and fellow emerging star Pavel Bure. This trio would play so well together that they became one of the Soviet League's most effective scoring lines, both domestically and internationally, as they would combine for 37 goals and 65 points during the Soviet League season, as well as 38 points in just 7 games to lead the Soviet Union to a gold medal at the 1989 World Junior Championships in Alaska. The trio also scored 18 points in 10 games to help the Red Army team win gold at the 1989 World Championships in Sweden, marking the 21st time that the Soviets had won the championship. However, it was at this tournament that Mogilny got ready to defect. On May 2nd, 1989, the day after the Soviets had won gold, Buffalo Sabres Director of Player Development Don Lucha received a phone call from a man with a Russian accent claiming to be Sergei Formichov, a representative and translator for Mogilny, stating that Mogilny wished to leave the Soviet Union and join the Buffalo Sabres. Lucha then took the news to Sabres general manager Jerry Meehan, who then took the news to the Sabres owner Seymour Knox III. Unsure if this was a hoax or not, the three ultimately decided that it would be worth the trip to Stockholm to figure out if this claim was legitimate, so Meehan and Lucha promptly boarded a plane and headed off to Sweden. What they didn't realise was the next few days of their lives would be some of the craziest they have ever experienced. Lucha and Meehan arrived in Stockholm the next day, met up with Formichov and Mogilny, and realised this was no joke. Mogilny was serious about leaving the Soviet Union and coming to play hockey in America. Given the Soviets' unwillingness to let high-profile members of their society just up and leave, the group had to formulate a plan to get the pair of Russians safely back to the States without the Soviets knowing about it, or even worse, trying to stop them. At approximately 7 PM on May 3rd, 1989, Lucha and Meehan drove to meet with Formichov and Mogilny. The two Russians then jumped in the Americans' car, and Operation Defection was underway. Meehan was dropped off at the US Embassy in Stockholm and began the paperwork that would allow Mogilny to enter the US either as a refugee or as an asylum seeker. While he was doing this, Meehan ordered Lucha to drive the pair of Soviets around the surrounding area, but far away enough from the embassy as to not arouse suspicion. While they were driving around, Mogilny then asked if they could stop somewhere so he could call his parents, since his previous call to his parents had been cut off. Lucha then decided to make a quick stop and let Mogilny make the call. However, the operator on Mogilny's call sounded a lot more like a Russian official than the previous operator did, so Mogilny immediately hung up the phone and told Lucha that the Soviets might know where they were and what they were doing. Meehan met up with the others and told them it would take at least 24 hours for the requisite paperwork to be completed. With the potential threat of the Soviets tracking them down or following their whereabouts, the group were forced to spend the next day driving around the Swedish countryside, bouncing from hotel to hotel as to not compromise their location until they got word that the paperwork was complete. Do keep in mind that Alexander Mogilny was only 20 years old at the time, but was willing to turn his back on his homeland, the country that had helped him become the high-talent player he was, and put both his own safety and the safety of his entire family at risk in order to seek a better life for himself overseas. Whether you think it was the right decision or not, that takes balls of steel. With Mogilny having gone AWOL, the rest of the Soviet hockey team were questioned by Soviet officials as to his whereabouts, if they had overheard his plans to disappear, and if any of them had served as accomplices to help him leave, before getting on a plane and heading back to Moscow without Mogilny the next morning on May 4th. It's important to mention that at the time, the Soviet Union required every able-bodied man to conduct military service, and one way of doing that was by playing for CSKA Moscow, as the team was regarded as a functioning division of the Soviet Army. By playing for the Red Army team, Mogilny was actually serving in the Soviet military and had proven capable enough to rise to the rank of lieutenant. So to the Soviets, this wasn't just a hockey player leaving the country. This was a ranking officer in their army defecting to the enemy. This was serious stuff. When the paperwork was finally complete, the group returned to the US Embassy and booked the next flight available to New York, but it didn't leave until early the next morning. This meant that the group had to avoid being spotted for almost another 24 hours before they could take their flight home to the States. On May 5th, 1989, Mian, Lucha, Mogilny, and Formachov were able to make it to the airport, board their flight without any trouble, and breathe a sigh of relief. Next stop was New York City. When the group landed in JFK Airport, they realised that their escape plan had somehow been leaked to the press overseas, with Swedish outlets having tracked down several of the hotels that the group had stayed at just a few days prior. Not only that, but the largest gathering of journalists that the JFK airport had ever seen at the time were waiting for them to give a press conference once they got off the plane. Mian met with the media briefly whilst Mogilny was going through immigration, and after roughly an hour and a half, Mogilny was cleared to enter the country. Operation Defection had been a success. Though Mogilny was now in the country, things weren't quite done there. It was decided that in order to keep Mogilny's whereabouts on the down low, both to the public and to anyone from overseas interested in finding him, Mogilny would stay with Don Lucha and his family. However, the family reported several instances of men with Russian accents asking around the neighbourhood to see Mogilny, but concerned they might be with the KGB, Mogilny declined to see anyone. It was then decided that Mogilny would apply to stay in the United States as a political asylum seeker, with the main driving force towards receiving this status being that if he attempted to return to the Soviet Union, Mogilny would be sentenced to 7 years hard labour, seen by most as practically a death sentence. After several months of legal hoop jumping, and with some added help from US President at the time, George H.W. Bush, Alexander Mogilny was granted political asylum status and allowed to remain in America. The 20-year-old Russian forward was finally free. So, what happened to Mogilny after his defection? Did he go on to have a successful NHL career? Oh boy, did he! Mogilny would join the Buffalo Sabres roster for the 89-90 season and would go on to play 16 seasons in the NHL, scoring 473 goals and 559 assists for 1,032 points in 990 games. The Russian forward would also be named a 6-time All-Star, tie the league lead in goals in 1993 with rookie Teemu Selanne at 76, and lift the Stanley Cup in 2000 as a member of the New Jersey Devils, becoming a member of the Triple Gold Club by winning an Olympic gold, a World Championship gold, and the Stanley Cup in the process. Mogilny's defection would also lead to a number of other Soviet players considering life overseas and what it would be like to play in the NHL. Thanks to the Soviets' recent glasnost policy, which was created to force more government transparency, many Soviet superstars, such as Vyacheslav Fetisov, Vladimir Krutov, Igor Larionov, Sergei Makarov, and Sergei Fedorov, amongst others, were able to obtain official releases from the USSR in order to move overseas and play in the NHL. On December 26, 1991, over 2 years after Mogilny defected, the nation of the Soviet Union was no more, as the country was dissolved and many of its satellite states were given their independence. Though it sounds like it was ripped straight out of a spy movie, thanks to the help of the Buffalo Sabres front office, as well as the US government, Alexander Mogilny was able to defy the odds and become the first Soviet hockey player to defect to the National Hockey League. In doing so, Mogilny also inspired many of his Soviet contemporaries to make the move overseas, and in turn, both inspired and gave the opportunity for future generations of Russian hockey players to make a name for themselves in the best league in the world. Not a bad day's work for a 20-year-old hockey player, eh folks? And that's the story of the first Soviet player to defect to the NHL. What do you guys think about Mogilny's defection, as well as his career as a whole? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what you guys think. But thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, or watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. A big thank you to Chris Gadsby, Connor B, Paul Mallia, Jordan Whitehead, and Martin Tolness, as well as a huge thank you to Max Artis for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.